It's now only a matter of weeks since I reviewed the wonderful Apos Ray 6SN7 Select tube, and I'm back again now because they've actually got a better tube, apparently, and so I was really curious to see if spending 3 times the price on the Reserve tube could really be that much better than the Select tube. Of course, I want to start off this video by saying a huge thanks to Apos for sending me out a version of the Reserve tube. Unfortunately, I do only have one of them, so I haven't been able to test it in a super high-end amplifier like the Linear Tube Audio MZ3. And that means that what I'm going to tell you here might be slightly tempered by the fact that it was being run in the relatively affordable xDuoo TA-26. And I want to start off by saying that I'm not necessarily recommending that people go and spend $185 on a tube to put into an amplifier that's worth, from memory, about twice the price of that. Now, tubes are really important. Tubes are the core of an amplifier. It's where the signal goes through to get amplified. So it's a very important part of the signal chain. I do believe in investing in tubes because it is a big way to upgrade the amplifier. But I just want to make it clear, I'm testing them in the TA-26 because currently that's the only single 6SN7 tube amp I have here. It's not the tube amp I'm necessarily recommending the Reserves for. And with that in mind, let's get back to introducing the Reserve tube. As I just said, it's a $185 tube, which might seem ridiculous to some of you, but if you're running a $3,000 amplifier like the MZ3 for instance, then all of a sudden, spending $185 per tube isn't such a bad idea. As I said, it's the heart of the amplifier, it's right in the signal path, it kind of is the signal path. And so you can buy a single Reserve tube, as I said, for $185, but they are also available as matched pairs and matched quads if you have an amplifier that needs more. And so we're talking $185 for the Reserve tube here, and yes, I had pre-loosened it, it's not that loose in the TA-26, versus $65 for the Select tube. So we're talking 3 times the price for this one. It's a big jump up. The other thing I should address here, because some of you brought it up after the Select review, is that yes, these are going to be being made in the same factory that makes other tubes for other brands. It's no doubt a factory in China. I think there's only factories in China or Russia these days. And so the fact that these also do, to me, look like a PS Vane, Svane, I'm not sure what it is, but the fact that it looks like one of those brands says to me that it's probably coming out of the same factory. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because there's lots of factories in the world that make the same products for different companies. That's not unusual. I mean, Ferrari and Fiat are actually made by the same overall company. It doesn't mean that a Ferrari is only as good as a Fiat, or that a Fiat is automatically as good as a Ferrari. What it means is that they're using similar resources to make different products. And so in the case of these 2 tubes, they are significantly different. You can see it through the inside that there's some different materials being used. Now, I don't know enough about tube design to break down what those materials are doing and what the pros and cons of them are. What I can tell you though in a moment is whether or not the sound profile, the sound quality of each of them is worth spending 3 times as much on. And so I don't think there's really much more to say about these 2, and we might as well jump straight into some comparisons between them. But before I tell you how these 2 compare, I do want to quickly thank today's channel sponsor, and that's Aura. If you currently have multiple online security services like a VPN app, maybe a password manager app, an antivirus, maybe a separate spam and personal data protection service, if you've got all of those in different apps, or even worse, if you don't have all of those, then Aura might be of interest to you, because what they're doing, what Aura's offering, is a single solution that covers all those things at one single price. And so instead of you going out there and signing up to each individual plan for VPN, password manager, spam protection, all those things, Aura just bundle it all together into a single app or a single platform at one single price. And so if you would like to consolidate all those services into one provider, or if you don't currently have them and you want to find out how much protection and security you're missing, then those of you that are in the US can take up a special offer for Passion for Sound viewers and get a 2-week free trial of Aura for yourself. That means you can go in there for 2 weeks, check out all the different things that Aura can do for you, how it can protect you, how it can keep your personal data and information safe. And then also along the way, you can of course start cleaning it up for yourself. Start reducing the spam you're getting, get some protection from scammers. There's even identity theft insurance in there as well. So you can go in there, check it all out completely for free for 2 weeks. If that sounds good to you, there's a link in the description below, and it just takes you to aura.com/passionforsound. You can of course type that in manually if you prefer, just aura.com/passionforsound. And so thanks again to Aura for sponsoring today's video. And now let's talk about the differences between the Select and the Reserve tube. As I said before, I was running this test through the xDuoo TA-26, and that was being fed from my PC via a tubulous Consensus USB cable into the SendGround DS-DAC 1.0. I've got a review for that one coming very soon. And then the DS-DAC 1.0 via a Curious RCA cable into the xDuoo TA-26. In the power socket of the TA-26, I was running a Tungsol 6AS7G tube. It's a nice, affordable tube. And then the headphones I used for this were my ZMF Atriums. These are a high impedance headphone that's perfectly paired to something like the TA-26. I listened to a bunch of different tracks with these two tubes, but the one that I paused to make my notes on was Bad Seed by Diesel. And the way I wrote my notes this time, just to keep things interesting and different, was I literally took real-time notes as I experienced the reserve tube for the first time. And I tell that to you for two reasons. Firstly, it's so you understand that as I'm explaining what happened in the listening process, you can sort of come along that journey with me and discover it for yourself. And secondly, it's to point out that what I've said about the reserve tube might get better. It's not uncommon for tubes to improve a little bit with burn-in. They have components in there that get very hot during use. That's going to create expansion, contraction, etc. And so it could improve beyond what I'm about to say with some usage. But let's start with my impressions as I started with the Select tube. The first thing I noticed on this track with the setup that I've just described is the sound was punchy and clean. The vocal from Diesel was out front. It was well separated and well focused in the mix. And the clarity and attack on things like the guitar and the snare was smooth but clean. So it was a tubey sort of sound. We've got a relatively warm headphone in the Atriums paired up with an OTL tube amp. So it's not an attacking, energetic sound that I was getting here, but it was definitely clean and articulate, but smooth. And so I describe the overall sound here as being very enjoyable, very engaging. It's not super high fidelity in the way that a solid state amp would be, but it's definitely resolving and clean and articulate for a tube amp. Switching over then to the reserve tube, and there wasn't much change in tonality. It was pretty much the same tonality overall. But what did change was the sense of authority was amazing. I've not really experienced this with tubes before, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit. Everything, as I said, was the same tonally, but it was all so much more tightly controlled. There was authority and presence and energy in the sound that was just missing from the Select tube. And that's not a knock on the Select tube. The Select tube is fantastic, as I've already said, but somehow this reserve tube is just controlling everything better. What it was also doing was resolving a bit more texture in things like the drums, the vocals, the guitar. You could hear nuances with the reserve tube that you just can't with the Select tube. The bass also got tighter and deeper, and it was again a very obvious shift. Now, I knew coming into this that tubes are important. As I said at the beginning of this video, they are the heart of the signal path, but I've never really experienced the overall significant shift in quality in every area of the sound that I did here. I've rolled a bunch of different tubes through my Elekit TU-8200R. I've even got a set of very expensive NOS GEC KT66 tubes, and even going to those, I hear an improvement. But if you were to take them away from me and force me to use my new production, I think I've got a set of Mullard EL34s that I enjoy, I'd say it's okay. It's not going to be a huge, complete transformation of the amp. And yet I felt like with the reserve tube, it was a really significant shift. It shocked me. Now, some areas that didn't make a big change, although there was a slight improvement, things like the imaging and the soundstage, I don't feel was a massive change. That was more like what I was used to hearing from other tubes, which was a nice kind of incremental step forward in soundstage size, image separation, the image focus, things like that. It wasn't a transformation. It was that sense of authority and control. That was the transformation for me. And as I said, not one that I've heard before from tubes. And so at the end of this, I was really blown away by the reserve tube. But I also want to come back around and remind us that it's a tube worth 3 times the price of the Select tube. So I'm not again suggesting that people should necessarily buy the reserve tube for the TA-26. I mean, of course, if you love the TA-26, if you're sold on it, you want to keep it, and you want to upgrade it as far as possible, the reserve tube could be great for that. But I think really where you're going to get the absolute most out of the reserve tube is in higher end amps like the aforementioned Linear Tube Audio MZ3. That's where for me the value proposition makes the most sense, and I also think you're going to hear even more improvement than what I've described here when you're going to high level amplifiers. There are going to be other bottlenecks in an amplifier like the TA-26 that are actually probably holding back what the reserve tube can do, and that's pretty exciting to think that it can do even better still. but it also means that you need to think about where you're investing the money. And so I think for me, where the reserve tube starts to make sense would be, as a minimum, I think something like a Shitlear Plus. I can see in a Shitlear Plus this being spectacular. And then going anything above a Shitlear Plus, that's where I think the reserve tube starts to make a bit more financial or economical sense. There is no doubt in my mind it is a phenomenal tube, and I think it's one that anyone with a premium headphone amp should absolutely consider if you're looking for 6SN7 upgrades. It's fantastic, it's new production, which is great, so you're not having to worry about finding new old stock, finding a good matched pair. That's all being done straight out of the factory, ready for you at a really high quality level. And so I'm going to wrap things up here by saying that I am blown away by the reserve tube. I'm a huge fan, so much so that I actually want to go out and find a tube amp that I can make the most of it with. That's how good it is. I want to hear what it's capable of. I want to upgrade, find a better tube amp to really stretch its legs. Or maybe I'll just get 2 of them so I can put them into my linear tube audio MZ3 if I can get a new top plate that's going to fit the chunkier tube. That's something that I will mention here in case you haven't seen the Select Tube review. And that is that, if I can find my other tube, which is here, that's a standard 6SN7 size and shape. This is the shape of the Apos Ray tubes. So both the Select and the Reserve have this larger bottle style. And so you do need to be aware of that. If you've got an amp like an MZ3 with a closed top, you need to make sure that the hole is big enough, because this wide section here is going to be sitting, if we just hold those level, you can see that the top of the tube that may stick through the top of the case is going to be the wider part of the tube there. And likewise, if it's completely enclosed, this tube is much taller. You need to make sure you have the space for it. So do keep that in mind. It's enough that I want to go out and get a second one of these for the MZ3 because I'm absolutely blown away with what I'm hearing. And so I'd also love to hear if you've gone out and bought yourself a set of reserves. Let us know in the comments, how are you enjoying them and what amplifier have you got them in? If you're in the market for tubes and you're tossing around different ideas of which ones you should buy, then I hope this video has been useful, helpful and informative. And if it has, please hit the like button and subscribe and ring the notification bell if you haven't already. For now though, let me leave it to the music. So happy listening, be kind to each other, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.